The planet Velcora, located in the distant and uncharted reaches of the galaxy, had long been known as a strategic outpost, a crucial link in the supply chain of the Tarvek Consortium, an alliance of several alien species. Velcora was a pristine world, lush, quiet, and seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. Its most notable feature was its remote location and its population of low-ranking human workers, who had been exiled there after an intergalactic dispute between their homeworld and the Consortium. For centuries, the human workers on Velcora had lived in relative peace, isolated from the galaxy's tumultuous politics. They had rebuilt their lives, toiling on the planet's surface, cultivating the land and maintaining the Consortium's vast infrastructure. Life on Velcora was quiet and uneventful, but for all its calmness, a simmering resentment had been festering beneath the surface for years. These humans, discarded and forgotten by the galaxy's major powers, had come to understand one essential truth: they were expendable. As the years passed, the workers had been used more and more, their lives considered disposable in the pursuit of the Consortium's interests. Labor conditions worsened, and the workers were treated as little more than tools in the grand machinery of a war they had no stake in. But they had learned how to survive, to endure, and to remain unnoticed. That all changed when the Tarvek Consortium decided to make an example out of one of their own. A new directive was issued from the Consortium's High Council. In a cold, calculated move, they decided to move the workers off Velcora, replacing them with a more efficient robotic workforce. The humans long subjected to the Consortium's whims would be relocated to a new mining colony in the far reaches of the galaxy, where they would be forced to dig for resources, never to see the light of their old world again. The first shipments of workers were taken away in silence. But as the transports left, a single spark ignited among the human population. Someone had made a mistake. They had underestimated the anger of a species that had long been pushed to the brink. Victor Holt was one such worker, a mechanic who had spent over 30 years repairing the vast network of machinery on Velcora. He had seen his friends and family suffer, their hopes crushed under the weight of the Consortium's indifference. But it was the morning that the soldiers arrived to begin rounding up the workers for their exile that he knew something had changed. The soldiers, cold and efficient in their work, moved from one building to the next, taking their time to ensure every human was accounted for. Holt had always been a man of few words, but he had a fire inside him that had been kindled by years of suffering. He had been part of a quiet underground movement that had worked in the shadows, trying to organize a resistance. Most of the time, their efforts were thwarted by the surveillance systems the Consortium had installed to keep the workers in check. But now, as he watched the transports load up with his people, a thought struck him like a thunderclap. They had pushed the humans too far. He wasn't the only one who thought that way. Across Velcora, in the hidden nooks and crannies of the planet's settlements, whispers of rebellion were growing louder. Word spread quickly, passed along through stolen transmissions and secret messages. The workers knew their time had come. In the deepest corner of the largest settlement, a signal was sent. Holt's network had hacked into the Consortium's communications grid, sending out a message that would resonate across the galaxy. A single line of text was broadcast to every corner of the Tarvek Empire. Humanity will not be your tools anymore. At first, the Consortium didn't understand the gravity of the message. It seemed like a hollow threat, the ramblings of a few disgruntled workers who had nothing left to lose. But the reality was far more dangerous. This was not a message of surrender, but of defiance. And in the dark alleys and underground bunkers of Velcora, preparations for war were beginning. As Holt stood on the roof of a crumbling structure, watching the transports depart, a deep sense of purpose filled him. The Consortium had made a grave error. They thought they could treat humans like expendable pawns, crush their spirits with their cold logic and mechanical precision. But they had forgotten one vital fact. Humans were not like the other species they had conquered. Humans could endure, and they could fight back. The rage that had been building for generations was finally ready to explode. And when it did, The consortium would wish they had never set foot on Velcora. The stage was set. The consortium had made its move, and the humans of Velcora had responded. The air was thick with tension, and the galaxy, for the first time in centuries, felt like it was on the cusp of something new, something violent, something unstoppable. The consortium's arrogance had blinded them to the truth, that they had underestimated human rage. And now, they would pay the ultimate price. You said. Victor Holt sat in the dimly lit command center beneath the ruins of Velcora's main settlement. Around him, a dozen men and women were hunched over makeshift control panels, eyes focused on the flickering screens that glowed with stolen intelligence. They had breached the consortium's encrypted communication networks, gaining access to the most tightly held secrets of the Empire. News was trickling in from across the galaxy, not just Velcora, but from every corner of human settlement under the consortium's thumb. The news was as expected. The consortium, slow to react to the message, had begun to scramble. Reports of civil unrest were being suppressed across the galaxy, with local garrisons called into action to quell the uprisings. But Holt knew that the true battle had just begun. The consortium's soldiers, the might of their fleets, were formidable, but there was one thing they had never fully accounted for: human ingenuity. "Every system is locked down," said a voice from across the room. It was Mara, one of Holt's closest allies, a communications expert who had once been a high-ranking officer in the consortium's logistics division. "But I've got a lead on an old satellite relay. If we can get it up and running, we might be able to send out a signal to the rest of the galaxy. A warning, a rallying cry." Holt nodded, his mind racing. This was their moment. But they needed more than just a signal. They needed a plan. "We'll need to hit the garrisons hard," Holt said, his voice low and steady, the weight of command settling on him. "We disrupt their communication lines. Take control of the planet's defenses. Then we begin to rally the workers. If we can't stop them here, we make sure we spread the fire to every world they've subjugated." Mara tapped on her console, pulling up a map of Velcora's military infrastructure. There are 6 major defense points on the planet, all controlled by automated systems. "We don't stand a chance against them head-on." "But we can't fight them head-on," Holt said, a sharp glint in his eye. "We hit them from the inside. We've got allies in the ranks. And we've got something they don't: determination." It was a risky plan, but it was all they had. The workers across Velcora had been subjugated for so long that they were used to living under the boot of the consortium. But now, as Holt stared at the gathered faces around him, he could see the fire in their eyes. They were ready to fight. With the signals sent out to the galaxy, the first few hours were tense. As expected, the consortium responded quickly, sending reinforcements and locking down the settlements with overwhelming force. But what they didn't anticipate was the sheer scale of the human resistance. Velcora's network of tunnels and hidden bunkers, once a symbol of oppression, became the perfect hiding place for those who had risen against the consortium. The workers, long accustomed to secrecy and survival, became ghosts in their own world. They sabotaged power grids, rigged the communication arrays, and slowly began to dismantle the consortium's military presence, one piece at a time. On the front lines, Holt and his team struck fast and hard. They attacked garrisons under the cover of darkness, infiltrating command posts and taking out key officers. Mara's skills were invaluable. She used her knowledge of the consortium's communication networks to spread confusion among their ranks, turning their own tactics against them. But it wasn't just technology that gave the human resistance an edge. The consortium underestimated the power of desperation. Human beings, when pushed to the edge, could do things no alien species could comprehend. Holt saw it every day. Workers, once broken, now emerging from the shadows with weapons they had scavenged or crafted themselves. The battle for Velcora quickly escalated into an all-out war. Cities that had once been peaceful hubs of industry became battlegrounds. Buildings that had stood for centuries crumbled as bombs fell from the skies. But the consortium still didn't get it. They thought they could send in their elite forces to quash the uprising with overwhelming power. But each victory only seemed to fuel the fire. The message sent across the galaxy, the one Holt had personally delivered to the consortium, began to resonate. Other colonies, other workers in the far reaches of the galaxy began to stir. In the first weeks, reports came in of uprisings on other planets. Rebel groups were organizing. Systems that had been silent for years were now broadcasting encrypted signals, speaking the same language as the people of Velcora. We are not tools. We are not slaves. We are human. It was only a matter of time before the human rage that had been unleashed on Velcora spread to the stars. Holt stood at the command center, looking over the latest intel. The consortium had sent in a fleet of ships to bombard the planet, to wipe out the rebellion before it could spread further. But Holt didn't fear them. Not anymore. The battle had only just begun, and the consortium's arrogance would be their downfall. The tides had turned. The once quiet human workers, pushed to their breaking point, had transformed into a fighting force. As the consortium's grip weakened on Velcora and resistance flared up across the galaxy, Holt felt the weight of something even more dangerous than any weapon: hope. And that, Holt knew, would be their ultimate weapon. The first full-scale assault on Velcora had come swiftly. The consortium's fleets, well-trained and equipped, unleashed their full might upon the planet in an attempt to crush the uprising before it could spread beyond the workers' underground resistance. Their objective was clear: decimate the resistance, restore order, and remind the galaxy of the invincible power of the consortium. But what they hadn't counted on was that Velcora's workers were no longer afraid. Fear, once the consortium's most effective weapon, had evaporated in the face of human rage. What started as sabotage and guerrilla warfare grew into something much larger, more coordinated. Holt's messages had found their way into the hands of leaders across the galaxy, and rebellion was spreading faster than the consortium could react. On the battlefields of Velcora, victory was no longer defined by the size of the army or the firepower brought to bear. Instead, it was defined by the determination of the human spirit. Holt knew the consortium underestimated this more than anything else. He stood among the ruins of a destroyed garrison, watching as a convoy of workers turned rebels, once meek and fearful, now marched past him with weapons slung over their shoulders. The defiance in their eyes mirrored his own. This wasn't just about taking back Velcora anymore. It was about sending a message that would resonate throughout the galaxy. Across the planet, the Resistance's strikes were escalating. Holt and his team, now joined by several other cells of rebels, hit the consortium's strongholds with precision and overwhelming force. They'd taken control of several key installations, including power grids and weapons factories. With each success, the tide of war shifted in favor of the humans. The consortium, stunned by the swiftness of the rebellion, began to panic. Their fleet in orbit began pounding the surface of Velcora with heavy bombardments, hoping to break the back of the human resistance. But the rebellion had adapted. The humans had learned to fight under the radar, to strike when least expected, and to vanish into the shadows of their world. As Holt looked up, he saw a shadow in the sky, consortium warships descending, their guns primed, preparing to unleash hell upon the human resistance. But Holt wasn't afraid. They had planned for this. His comm device buzzed to life. Mara's voice crackled through. "Victor, it's time. The signal's been planted. The outer colonies are receiving it now." "Understood. Hold steady, Mara. We've got this." The rebellion wasn't just confined to Velcora anymore. Holt's signal had reached the farthest corners of human settlement. Workers on distant planets had heard the call. In the outer colonies, miners, engineers, and laborers who had toiled under the consortium's oppressive rule for decades began to rise. Across the stars, uprisings broke out in places the consortium had once thought were impenetrable. Stations in deep space, forgotten worlds on the fringe of the galaxy. They all began to echo with the same rallying cry: humanity is not your tool. It didn't take long for the consortium to realize the full extent of the rebellion spread. Their military forces, scattered across dozens of systems, were stretched thin. They had underestimated the sheer size of the spark Holt had ignited. What they once thought was a minor insurrection on a single, remote planet had blossomed into a full-scale uprising. It wasn't just Velcora anymore, it was everywhere. Back on Velcora, the Consortium's fleet began to bombard the planet's surface, sending waves of destruction in an attempt to wipe out the last pockets of resistance. But the human forces on the ground were prepared. Holt had learned to anticipate the Consortium's every move. Through intercepted transmissions, the rebels had gained access to the Consortium's fleet command. The timing was crucial. If they were going to take Velcora back, they needed to act quickly before the Consortium could unleash a final, devastating counterattack. Victor Holt stood in the command center, coordinating with rebel leaders from across the planet. The moment had arrived. Their final offensive was ready. The remaining Consortium forces, divided and disorganized, were still focusing their efforts on military targets, unaware of the real threat. Now, Holt ordered, voice calm, resolute. We hit them with everything we've got. With precise timing, rebel cells across Velcora launched simultaneous strikes on key military installations. While the Consortium's ships were focused on their bombardment, Holt's forces took control of the remaining anti-air defenses and key communication hubs. They were on the cusp of making the final push to seize Velcora completely. In the chaos of battle, with explosions shaking the very ground beneath them, Holt and Mara made their way to the heart of the Consortium's command post. It was a high-tech fortress, heavily guarded and fortified. The Consortium's elite soldiers held the gates, but Holt's team fought through them. They had learned the enemy's tactics and weaknesses, and now they used them to their advantage. When they breached the fortress, Holt and Mara came face to face with the Consortium's highest-ranking officers on Velcora. The officers, once so confident in their dominance, now looked terrified. They had expected the rebellion to falter, to break under the weight of superior military power. Instead, it had exploded into a wildfire that was consuming their empire. "We underestimated you," one officer said, his voice trembling. "You should have stayed down. You should have stayed in your place." Holt stepped forward, his expression cold and unforgiving. The price of underestimating humanity is far steeper than you can imagine. With that, Holt issued the final command. The last stronghold of the Consortium on Velcora fell. As Holt watched the Consortium's flag fall from the final garrison, a wave of relief washed over him. It wasn't over, not yet. There was still much to be done. The rebellion had taken Velcora back, but the war was far from won. But for the first time, Holt felt the tremors of something far more powerful than any weapon. It was the sound of an empire on the brink of collapse. The fire had spread, and now the entire galaxy would feel the heat of humanity's rage. The victory on Velcora sent shockwaves through the galaxy, reverberating in places both near and far. The Consortium had suffered a major blow. Their military stronghold on the planet had crumbled, their fleet had been driven into retreat, and their forces had been scattered. But Holt knew this was just the beginning. The Consortium might have lost Velcora, but they were far from defeated. The true test was whether the rebellion could hold its ground, whether the cracks in the empire could widen into a full fracture. The planet Velcora, once a symbol of human oppression, was now a beacon of defiance. But the weight of leadership was starting to sink in for Holt. The rebellion had grown, and with it, the stakes. The galaxy was watching, and the Consortium was regrouping. The question was no longer just about Velcora's liberation. It was about whether humanity could rise to take on the full might of the Tarvek Consortium. Holt stood in the war room, surrounded by his closest commanders. The map of the galaxy was displayed on a large screen, filled with red and green dots indicating Consortium strongholds and rebel-controlled systems. Velcora was now green, but there were still dozens of planets and stations under the Consortium's rule. Holt had to make a decision: strike fast and hard to take the fight to the Consortium's heart, or consolidate their gains on Velcora and fortify their position. "We have a brief window before the Consortium fully regroups," Mara said, her voice low but determined. "They're already moving reinforcements, but it'll take them time to stabilize their command. If we act now, we can hit them when they're vulnerable." Holt ran a hand through his hair. thinking it over. The attack on Velcora had drained their resources, and the rebellion had lost many good people. Yet he knew Mara was right. The consortium's weakness lay in its overconfidence, in its underestimation of human will. They were the most dangerous when they thought they had won. "Do we have enough intel?" Holt asked, his voice steady, weighing his decision. Mara nodded, her fingers dancing across the console. "We've got a sleeper cell on one of their military stations. I've been in contact with them for days. They've pinpointed the location of their command fleet in the Sindara system. It's risky, but if we take them out, we could cripple their ability to respond." The room fell silent, the weight of the decision settling on everyone present. This wasn't just about fighting the consortium anymore. This was about dismantling their control over the galaxy, taking the war directly to their command center. "Let's move out," Holt said, his voice firm. "We take down their command fleet. We show the galaxy that we're not just a rebellion. We're a force they can't ignore." The journey to the Sindara system was long, the silence in the rebel fleet palpable. The ships, once crewed and cobbled together from salvaged parts, now carried the weight of a galaxy's hopes on their shoulders. As they neared the system, Holt could feel the tension growing. Their mission was fraught with danger. The consortium's fleet was massive, heavily fortified, and well defended. But Holt had never been one to back down from a fight. Every human in his fleet shared the same resolve. They weren't just fighting for Velcora anymore. They were fighting for every human worker, every oppressed colony, every person who had ever been treated as nothing more than a cog in the consortium's vast machine. "We hit fast and hard," Holt said, his voice crackling over the comms to his fleet. "We'll break their perimeter first. Then we hit the command fleet. Remember, we have the element of surprise. Stay sharp." As the rebel ships entered the Sindara system, they were met with the full force of the consortium's defenses. But Holt had anticipated this. He had used the previous weeks to carefully study the consortium's tactics, learning how their fleets moved, how they communicated. He had prepared the perfect counterattack. The battle unfolded like a choreographed dance of destruction. Rebel ships, moving with uncanny precision, struck at the consortium's perimeter. The fleet was slower than expected, their ships not designed for rapid responses. The rebels, on the other hand, were agile and fast. They picked off the outer defenses with surgical strikes, weaving in and out of enemy fire. And then, as planned, they made their move. Holt's flagship, the Freedom's Dawn, broke through the enemy lines, charging straight toward the heart of the consortium's command fleet. The rebel ships followed, cutting through the chaos of battle as they made a beeline for their target. The consortium's flagship, a massive, imposing ship known as the Titan's Wrath, loomed ahead. Its guns were trained on the incoming fleet, but Holt's team had already begun their assault. Mara's voice came through his comms, calm and focused. "Victor, we've hacked into their main comms. They're scrambling, their command structures in disarray." "Good," Holt replied. "Let's finish it." With precision and deadly force, the rebel fleet focused all their firepower on the Titan's Wrath, pounding it from all sides. Explosions rocked the massive ship as its shields began to buckle. The consortium's flagship, once thought invincible, was beginning to fall. But the battle was far from over. The consortium's reinforcements were closing in, and the tide of the battle could still turn. The rebels had to move quickly. "Prepare to board the Titan's Wrath," Holt ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. "We end this here." The boarding action was intense. Rebel soldiers, led by Holt's elite fighters, breached the Titan's Wrath's hull, cutting their way through the corridors in a relentless assault. The enemy forces, disorganized and demoralized, fought fiercely, but were no match for the human insurgents' resolve. Holt moved forward with a single goal: find the consortium's command officer and end this. At the heart of the ship, he found what he was looking for. The consortium's highest-ranking officer, General Velthar, stood before him, surrounded by his remaining loyal guards. He was an imposing figure, tall and armored in black, his eyes full of hatred and disbelief. "You think you've won?" Velthar sneered, his voice cold and cruel. "This is just a small fraction of the might of the consortium. You are nothing. Holt's gaze never wavered. No, you're nothing. You're a tyrant whose reign ends today. In a final brutal showdown, Holt struck down Valthar and the remnants of his guard. The general's death signaled the collapse of the consortium's command on the Titan's wrath. With their leader gone and their fleet in chaos, the remaining consortium forces scattered in retreat. The victory in the Sindara system was decisive. Holt and his fleet had crippled the consortium's command, sending a clear message to every corner of the galaxy. The cracks in the Empire were no longer small. They had turned into gaping wounds. As the last of the consortium's ships fled the system, Holt stood on the bridge of the Freedom's Dawn, looking out at the stars. The war was far from over, but they had made a significant stride. The human resistance had become more than just an annoyance. They had become a force that could change the galaxy forever. The fire had spread far beyond Velcora. The flames of rebellion now burned bright across the stars. And the consortium, in their arrogance, had only themselves to blame. You said. The victory in the Sindara system had sent the galaxy into a frenzy. The fall of the Titan's wrath and the death of General Valthar marked a turning point in the war. The consortium, once an unstoppable force, was now reeling, disoriented by the relentless power of the human rebellion. The cracks that had begun to form on Velcora were now deep, and the Empire's grip on the galaxy was weakening by the day. But Holt knew that the consortium was not done yet. The upper echelons of the Tarvek Empire were vast. Its influence spread far and wide. The rebels had won battles, but the war was far from over. In the wake of their stunning victories, Holt and his allies began to prepare for the next phase of their struggle. Velcora, now a symbol of human defiance, had become the headquarters for the rebellion's leadership. The city, once full of factories and work camps, had been transformed into a command center. Rebel forces streamed in from all corners of the galaxy, and Holt could see the growing strength of the rebellion. But even as his fleet swelled in size, the weight of leadership pressed on him. He knew they had to act decisively before the consortium could regroup. We've gained ground, but we can't afford to rest, Holt said as he stood before a holographic map of the galaxy, surrounded by the key members of the rebellion's leadership. Mara, of course, was at his side, her sharp eyes scanning the data on the map. The consortium will take time to rebuild, but they've got resources we can't underestimate. They'll come after us with everything they have. Mara nodded, the determination in her expression unwavering. We've had successes, but we still need a decisive blow to end this. If we can hit them where it hurts, their core worlds, their economy, we can destroy their will to fight. Holt thought for a moment, studying the map. The consortium had several core worlds, heavily fortified and fiercely loyal to the Empire. Striking at them head-on would be a suicide mission, but Holt knew their weakness. The consortium's power wasn't just in its military. It was in its ability to maintain control over the masses. If they could break that control, if they could make the galaxy's inhabitants see the consortium as weak and vulnerable, they might have a chance. We hit their capital, Holt said, a quiet intensity in his voice. If we take their leadership, if we cripple their central command, the rest of their empire will follow. It'll fracture them. Mara looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. You're talking about the heart of the Tarvek Empire, their most secure world. They'll have the full might of their forces guarding it. I know, Holt said, his voice steady. But the galaxy has seen what we can do. We've already shattered their command structure in Sindara. This is the next step. If we can make it to their capital, we'll have everything we need to end this war. As the rebellion prepared for the boldest strike of their campaign, the consortium's leaders were not idle. In the wake of their losses, the Empire's surviving generals and commanders gathered in secret, preparing for a counterattack that would push back the growing human threat. In the heart of the consortium's capital, on a world known as Tarvian, the highest-ranking officials convened in a massive war room. They were not used to failure, and the losses they had suffered were unprecedented. General Rilker, one of the consortium's most brutal and unyielding commanders, had been given the task of quelling the rebellion once and for all. The humans have proven themselves capable of rebellion, Rilker said, his voice like cold steel. But they are nothing without the structure of their leadership. Holt, Mara, and the rest of them have stirred the masses, but they're still scattered. They're a loose network of insurgents, no real army. We'll break their unity. The room was filled with murmurs of agreement. For all their arrogance, the consortium's leaders knew they couldn't underestimate the human spirit any longer. They had been forced to recognize the rebellion's strength, and now it was time for them to deal the final blow. Holt and his team were preparing for what they knew would be their most dangerous mission yet, an assault on the heart of the consortium's empire. They had gathered the best of the rebellion's fleet, ships capable of making a long-range strike into Tarvian's heavily defended space. But as Holt stood on the bridge of the Freedom's Dawn, looking out at the stars, a sense of foreboding crept over him. He knew this mission would not be easy, but it wasn't just about the risks they would face. It was about the future they were trying to build. Every action, every sacrifice had brought them here. If they failed, the rebellion would lose everything. "Ready the fleet," Holt ordered. "We move out in 2 hours. Our target is Tarvian's Central Command. If we can take their leadership, we end this war." Mara appeared at his side, her expression more serious than ever. "Victor, once we get to Tarvian, there will be no turning back. We'll have no escape if the fleet's waiting for us. Are you sure about this?" Holt turned to face her, his eyes filled with the same steely resolve that had kept him fighting all these years. "We don't have a choice. We take Tarvian, or the galaxy will never be free." The journey to Tarvian was fraught with danger. The consortium had fortified their capital to the maximum, and every moment felt like a race against time. As the fleet approached the planet's orbit, alarms blared through the ships. The consortium had anticipated their move, and they were waiting. The battle was chaos. The human fleet, smaller but faster and more agile, danced through the consortium's blockade, targeting their weak points. Rebel ships flew with reckless abandon, outmaneuvering the bulkier, slower consortium vessels. The sound of explosions filled the void, and the stars were obscured by the smoke of battle. Holt's heart pounded as he commanded the Freedom's Dawn through the chaos. "Target the capital's defenses. We need a breach." The rebel fleet pressed forward, inching closer to the heart of the enemy's defenses. Their victory on Valkara and in Sindara had been decisive, but the battle for Tarvian would be the true test. Victory or defeat would shape the galaxy for generations. As the final assault on the capital began, Holt couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. They had fought for years to get to this point. They had sacrificed so much. This was the moment that would determine their future. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The final battle for Tarvian had begun, and in the heart of it, Holt and his fleet pressed forward, determined to take the fight to the very heart of the Tarvek consortium. The question was simple. Would they win, or would the consortium crush them in one final deadly strike? And if they won, could they truly create a new galaxy from the ashes of the old? The battle for Tarvian had escalated beyond anything Holt and the rebellion had imagined. The consortium had mobilized its full might to defend its capital, and the fight in the skies above Tarvian was a chaotic symphony of explosions and laser fire. Rebel ships darted between the massive consortium warships, exploiting their weaknesses, but it was clear that the odds were stacked against them. Yet Holt felt the fire of hope burning in his chest, the belief that this was their moment, their one chance to end the war. Every moment they held the line was another step closer to the ultimate goal, victory. Inside the Freedom's Dawn, Holt paced in the command room, his mind working through strategies, his thoughts heavy with the responsibility of the moment. The battle outside raged on, but the true challenge lay ahead, infiltrating the heart of the consortium's power on the planet itself. If they were going to win, they had to strike directly at the Central Command. The heart of the enemy's operations was housed in a sprawling fortress within Tarvian's heavily fortified capital city. "Mara," Holt said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "Status update." Mara stood at a nearby console, her fingers flying over the keys. "We've made significant progress through their defenses, But it's not enough. The consortium's ground forces are massive, and their air defenses are overwhelming. We need to clear the way for the landing teams. Holt clenched his fists. They were so close, yet the path ahead seemed nearly impossible. We have no choice. We go all in. Mara nodded without hesitation. I'll coordinate with the other cells. We hit them hard. We make it count. They had a plan, one that required flawless execution. Holt knew there could be no mistakes. He looked around the room at his team, knowing that their sacrifice would determine the fate of billions. There would be no turning back once they launched their final assault. The rebel fleet had pushed the consortium back, but their forces were regrouping. Holt's final order had been clear: strike the heart. End the war. It was time to take the fight to the ground. Hundreds of transports and assault ships descended into the atmosphere of Tarvian, cutting through the thick clouds of smoke and debris. On the surface, the consortium was ready for them, a massive defense force positioned at every key location. But Holt and his people had come prepared. For every one of the consortium's hardened soldiers, the rebels had a dozen willing to fight to the death. They didn't just want to win, they needed to, for their families, for their future. The ground battle erupted in a storm of blaster fire and explosions. Holt led the charge, his pulse racing as his boots hit the soil of Tarvian. The consortium's defenses were formidable, but the rebellion's rage was unstoppable. Rebel soldiers tore through the streets, using guerrilla tactics honed over years of struggle. Each small victory built on the last, as they pushed forward, inch by inch, toward the central command. At the heart of Tarvian, inside the consortium's massive citadel, the remaining leadership of the Tarvek Empire gathered for a final stand. The walls were reinforced with the best technology money could buy, and the building itself was designed to withstand a siege. But the consortium's arrogance had left them vulnerable. They had underestimated humanity. Inside the Citadel's war room, the remaining commanders and officials of the consortium stood, preparing for what they knew could be their last battle. Their faces were grim, resigned, and desperate. They had failed to maintain control of the outer systems, lost their fleet, and now the rebellion was coming for them. General Rilker, the man who had been tasked with securing Tarvian's defenses, stood at the head of the room. His face was a mask of cold rage, but even he knew that time was running out. "They will be upon us soon," he growled. "We will hold them here at all costs." But his words carried no confidence, no hope. His voice was the voice of a dying empire. The rebellion's advance could not be stopped. Holt's final attack had shattered their ability to fight back. The consortium's once legendary strength had crumbled in the face of human determination. Holt's team reached the heart of the citadel, their every step a testament to their resolve. They fought through the last line of defense, taking down the elite guards that protected the central command. Every hallway, every corner was a battleground, but the rebels were relentless. As they finally breached the inner sanctum of the citadel, they found themselves face to face with the remnants of the consortium's leadership. Rilker stood, flanked by the final few of the consortium's high-ranking officers. Their faces were filled with disbelief, a mix of contempt and fear. They had fought countless battles across the galaxy, crushed entire civilizations underfoot, but now they were staring into the eyes of their conquerors. "You," Rilker said with a sneer, "think you've won? You think you can bring down the Tarvek Empire?" Holt stepped forward, his voice low and steady, filled with the finality of a war that had taken everything from them. "No, Rilker. We think you failed. We think you underestimated us. And now it's over." With one swift movement, Holt's hand reached for the command panel and pressed the final button. The message went out across the entire galaxy. The consortium had fallen. The silence that followed was deafening. The war was over. For the first time in decades, the stars seemed to hold their breath, as if the universe itself was waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Back on Velcora, the celebrations were already beginning. The human rebellion had not only broken the chains of oppression, but they had shattered the very foundations of an empire that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. The news of the consortium's collapse spread like wildfire. Uprisings in every corner of the galaxy exploded in a wave of hope and liberation. But as the cheers and celebrations rumbled through the air, Holt stood alone, looking out over the horizon of Tarvian. The galaxy was free, but there was still much to be done. The war was over, but the rebuilding would take years. There would be no quick fix for the scars left on human and alien alike. Mara approached him, her expression soft but filled with resolve. "What now?" she asked, her voice quiet, yet carrying the weight of the moment. Holt turned to her, the fire still burning in his eyes. "Now we rebuild. We create something better. The galaxy is ours now, not theirs. It's our turn to build something that lasts. We take the lessons we've learned, the strength we've gained, and we make sure we never forget what it cost to get here." The stars above Tarvian shimmered, bright and untainted. The fire of the rebellion had consumed the old order. Now a new dawn had arrived,